Dr. Justice over here, and this is video number 6, sharing with you the top 10 findings from doing over 15,000 brain scans on athletes, coaches, and business people around the world performing a very high task. I want to talk to you about practice. One of the surprises that we found is that when people are practicing, their brain waves is all over the place. Their mind is essentially wandering every 3 to 10 seconds. And there's a big myth that if I go practice, the more that I practice or the more hours I spend practicing, the better I will become. And I'm telling you that that is a myth. And I think the myth was perpetuated on the philosophy that the harder I work, the luckier I get, or Malcolm Gladwell's book where he said, to master something, you need 10,000 hours. Those kinds of premises do not take into account the current state of the human brain around the world. And the current state of the human brain is that most of what is in our brain was both created and consumed in the last 24 hours with an elevated EEG. Our noise level is so much higher than even 10, 15 years ago. That means there's competition in the brain to store things that you have done or you have experienced by the time you go to bed. What I'm telling you is that most of your practice, no matter how good it was and no matter how quality-oriented it was, it will be lost before you go to bed and almost certainly within 24 hours. So if you have a great practice session on a Monday, you go spend 4 or 5 hours, there's a very high chance that most of that will become useless by the time you get to Wednesday or Thursday. I don't use the term useless lightly. I'm not just throwing that out. Useless means you cannot use it. So the focus needs to be, all right, whatever I do, I need to practice in such a way that it is stored in my brain. Right? So the storage of the practice is more important than the practice itself. And so again, because there's a lot of competition, your brain has to make thousands of decisions about what to store based on the events of the whole day. Not just the events of the day, but everything that you're consuming on your phone or the devices that you have. The default factory setting about what to store in the brain is not the wonderful practice that you have. It's something negative that happened to you during the course of the day. Something negative that you consumed on social media or an email that you got or a conversation that you had. So we have to learn a new way of practicing. Yes, let's go practice, but the value of that practice is predicated on how much effort we then put after the practice on making sure the brain is basically imprinting, it's storing that stuff. Because the purpose of practice should be when I am actually playing, I should remember the benefits of that practice. If I don't remember it because there's just noise in my head and I haven't done enough to store it, well, then that practice was useless. So the most important time to store is really that 30 minutes to an hour before you go to bed. That's when your brain ultimately is going to decide, okay, sort of last in, first out kind of a thing. I want to record whatever I did in my practice, the top 2 or 3 things that I learned in my practice, and I want to remember those kinds of things. I want to feed my brain, refeed them those kinds of things, and then the next 24 to 48 hours I have to repeat that in my head in some version. I'm going to talk more about this in my new book, but practice, again, is at the mercy of the brain and all of the other things that the brain has to choose what it's going to store.